Good afternoon to you all, and thank you for joining us. Our webinar today will explore employee wellbeing, and I have the pleasure of introducing Richard Holmes, who is the Director of Wellbeing and Managing Director of Westfield Health. So as an introduction to Richard, Richard is a health and wellbeing expert who's dedicated his career to improving people's quality of life. And he's really passionate about the impact of health and well-being on businesses and individual performance. So Richard and his team believe, and one of his team are here today, Louise, they believe that businesses who invest in the well-being of their staff will see transformational changes, with employees living well, working well, and achieving more. So welcome today, Richard and Louise. It's lovely you're able to join us. So the format of today will be an interview format, so a little bit different what we usually do within our chamber webinars. So I'll ask Richard some questions, and I'm really looking forward to Richard sharing his answers. So as in similar webinars, if you get any questions, please do not hesitate to put it in the chat function below, or raise your hand in the attendee list section. So you're all on mute just now, but if you do want to raise your hand in chat, we have Alan on the call to take you off of mute. So Richard, is there anything you want to share before we start?
No, fine. Just thank you for having me, and welcome everyone. And I hope this session will be useful for you. Just to give you a little bit of background, I'm the Director of Wellbeing at Westfield Health. So you may know Westfield predominantly in terms of the health cash plans that we provide through the chamber. But I'm responsible for the other side of the business, which is the management and delivery of wellbeing programs into workplace environments, supporting those clients in terms of developing, if you like, solutions to meet their particular business needs in relation to how wellbeing can provide or contribute to that solution.
Great, thank you, Richard. I do appreciate that. So if we're ready to go and start the questions, my first question to you would be, what is the biggest challenge people are facing just now from a wellbeing perspective, Richard? What are you seeing?
What we're seeing, yeah, I think everybody on this call today, or video conference, sorry, I keep slipping into old habits there, probably agree we're all having a personal challenge, and we're probably seeing it with the people that work in our businesses. And it's just this, how do we adapt to this, what's now boringly called the new normal? And of course, it's not just adapting to the here and now. Very shortly, we're going to be looking at returning to work, aren't we? So how are we going to adapt to that as well? So we need to look at that in terms of what those adaptation challenges are. They different for different types of people that work for us? So, you know, for some, the big challenge is loss of purpose, especially those of our workers that are on furlough. Others, it might be isolation. Key workers, home workers, it could well be overwork. You know, I see a number of wry smiles there on the screens for people that are working from home. We used to do a lot of work before COVID with organisations in terms of educating their teams about working from home when they were making strategic moves to close down offices and move people into home working environment. And there were actually 4 million home workers before COVID. They now reckon it's around 16 to 17 million. And of course, that's going to start reducing a little bit now as we sort of hopefully progress out of things. So we've got all these different challenges that we have, and as leaders, team leaders that we all are, HR professionals, small business owners, we've got to recognise that these challenges are going to be different for different individuals or groups of individuals within our workforce. I don't think there's one rule can sort everybody out. But I think there is one thing that is an issue for everyone, and it's just the not knowing, isn't it? Yeah,
absolutely.
And not knowing what's around the corner. So yeah, those would, I think, is the biggest challenges people. I'm certainly getting feedback from other employers, from forums like that I do. That's the big challenge for everyone.
Absolutely agree.
Yeah.
Absolutely agree, Richard. And, you know, there's been no sort of frame of reference or situation like this in our lifetime before. And, you know, so based on the challenges that you've just talked about, what is the best approach that business leaders or HR professionals, which you touched on there, what can they do to support their team?
I think,
or their team members?
Yeah. I mean, one of the key things, going back to this not knowing idea, it's human nature. We're wired this way, by the way. There's no getting out of it. But generally speaking, we like consistency and predictability in our lives. That's how humans are geared. So when I'm talking to HR professionals and other small business owners, and I used to be a small business owner once upon a time as well, so I know where you're coming from. What they're saying is, above all, that people just want clear communication about what happens next and what they can expect moving forward. But the challenge and what causes us on this call all the stress is quite often the answer is we don't know. Yeah. But I think people appreciate that honesty. They'd rather that honesty than you trying to fudge an answer. And what a lot of people in our position are starting to do is actually recognize and accept that we don't know, feel comfortable actually saying that to people, but then saying, but for the next week, this is what we should be looking at. And the week after, this is what's going to happen. And so we start sort of supporting people by managing their expectations, by just dealing with the here and now and dealing with things in small chunks of time. So that seems to be working quite well for a lot of people.
Okay, and I like your point when you talked about, Richard, people appreciating honesty, as we've seen a lot of people showing their vulnerability over the past weeks, which is absolutely okay, and it's okay to not be okay. But if you could narrow it down, what would your top 3 approaches or top 3 tips right now would be to support team members? Because you talked about maybe not being able to give them an answer now, but maybe giving them a time scale when you can give them an update on an answer for them.
Yeah, well, I think that what you just touched on before that, in terms of actually saying to people, it's all right not to feel okay. It's all right to feel this way, to do this. I think with that in mind, what's really important is the leadership that we show now. Yes, leadership always has to be firm, but I think we have to be compassionate and have empathy with people and lead them through that process, like you've just said, by, people look at their leaders in terms of permission of what they can and can't do, and sometimes how they can feel. So it's really important that we pass these messages on to them. And part of that process is, again, I think, communication, and keeping that communication as clear and unambiguous as possible. And that goes back to that honesty piece again, and that leadership piece. Thirdly, support. We know that how people feel and their well-being significantly contributes to their personal performance, whether that's at work, whether it's at home. So what support can we provide as leaders to our people in terms of, say, practical support? So how can we advise them on working from home? How can we advise them on surviving furlough? And just so everybody's aware, Louise will pop up on the chat a link to the Westfield website, where we've got loads of free support fact sheets that you can actually download and use with your people on topics like that. And the other area of support is well-being. More than ever at the moment, we need to be as fit and healthy as possible, both mentally and physically. So again, we should be looking at what we can do to support people. And drop in a fourth, actually, Evelyn.
Oh, great.
That's for everybody on the call here, is look after yourself. Because if you're not as fit and healthy as you can be, and the best that you can be, then you're not going to be as useful and valuable to the people you're trying to support. Yeah. So if we want to build resilient teams, actually it's quite important that the leader's quite resilient as well. So, don't feel guilty about taking some time to look after yourself, because you are probably the best resource available to your people.
Mhm. Absolutely. And I love that. I definitely love that fourth point there. And just with you touched on earlier, Richard, about the feedback that you're getting, and you've shared that you work with businesses who invest in well-being of their team members. Are you able to share with us what are these businesses doing, and what does this look like?
Yeah, well, a lot of, I mean, we've been through a similar experience that everybody on this call has been. Sort of, I think Monday, March the 23rd, I remember it distinctly.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Our business basically fell off the cliff that week, and because our business at the heart of it is coaching. So that's sending wellbeing coaches to a workplace site to do workshops, one-to-one consultations, health checks, all those types of things. So you can imagine what happened there. Now, we'd always done things by a webinar and remotely, but it almost been a substitute. So we had to completely remodel our business to do that. So a lot of what our clients are doing are using sort of live coaching webinars, a little bit like this, to support their people with pertinent issues relevant to the moment. That might be general, so we might be supporting people in sleeping better, developing appropriate routines, energy, those types of things, as well as mental resilience. But we're also getting clients asking us for specific things. So a good example of that is a housing association. And we did a coaching webinar for their line managers, because they need to put their chippies, the electricians, the plumbers back to work, because the housing association had to keep the maintenance of their estate going. Now, you can imagine the challenge for the tradesmen going into people's homes. So the training they specifically want to do is, how can managers have challenging conversations about challenging situations? So there's a whole host of things that we're finding organizations are using wellbeing for, slightly off-piste, but where again it centers on how can we support the well-being of individuals in that situation. It was almost sort of their mental confidence, dealing with their uncertainties, that type of thing. So those types of things are going on. But one of the things I would suggest to everybody as well is to look at what existing service provision do you have for your employees? Okay, what was in place before this situation began? You know, is it actually fit for purpose for the current situation? Do you need to amend it in any way? Just sort of re-engineer it slightly so that it's more relevance and easier to use, given the restrictions that we've got. So that's really important. And the other thing I'd say is about what I refer to as a cadence of communication. So a lot of the wellbeing support we provide is through communications to our people. And the best practice out there is where organizations have said, right, rather than just throw the kitchen sink at it at the start and then be left with nothing to say, how can we have an actual plan of feeding out that support information over a period of time? So that seems to be a lot more effective with a bit of forethought and planning behind what support you're going to provide in a communication point of view and when you provide it. Gives you some sustainability.
Absolutely. No, absolutely wise words there, Richard. And you mentioned there to help deal with immediate well-being. So from an employer or HR professional perspective, if they were concerned of any team members' mental health, what can you share with us today, what they can do simply and quickly to help in the first instance?
Simply and quickly. Right, okay. What was interesting, we just, I don't know whether everybody's aware, but we do quite big, we're sort of an evidence-based organisation in terms of the wellbeing we deliver, and we do some major pieces of research. One of those we've just done was published on Tuesday this week, and it's called Divided Together, and it's about all the tensions that COVID has developed within organisations, and particularly in different worker groups. One thing that came out of that was that 50% of the respondents said that they felt their mental health had deteriorated to some extent during this period, which isn't surprising really when you think the pressures people are on, all the uncertainties. So I think it's very pertinent for you to ask that question. in terms of simply and quickly, again, keep this in short blocks of time to help you manage it. But my question to you would be, what's your mental health plan in terms of supporting your people for the next 3 months? No longer, just for the next 3 months. Okay, so what are you providing for people to support them? They might be services that you've bought in or buying in. They might be free support services in terms of directing people to Mind, the NHS, using support resources that we provide free of charge on mental well-being as educational pieces. So what are you going to do over the next 3 months in a planned way to support that's relevant to what you know your people need, as opposed to what generally people need? And then how are you going to clearly communicate that? So have you got a simple, just clear communication plan over the 3 months about how you feed that out? And then at the end of every month, just add the 3rd month back on. So you've just got a rolling plan. And that also allows you to be a little bit more agile and flexible in your thinking, because this situation is developing all the time, isn't it? And the demands on people's mental well-being are going to change all the time. So down here in England, you know, people are starting to get worried about what does return to the workplace mean. I know you guys are a bit behind us, thankfully. But so that again, it allows that agility. The other key thing I do in terms of the next 3 months is ask yourself, right, what are our team leaders doing? So how regularly are our team leaders communicating with their teams and individual team members? That's whether they're working or whether they're furloughed. There's no distinction. How do those team leaders then discuss with team members how they're feeling? So, and how do they then are able to understand what would work for those team members, what potential support that you already have in place would be useful for them? So really use your network. And if you're a small business owner and it may be you've just got 4 or 5 people working for you, then it's down to you, isn't it? So what are you doing as that line manager as well as the business owner? So you've got a few hats to wear on that one.
Okay.
But, interesting enough, can I just throw it back to you?
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah. Just from a personal point of view, because I know this is important for everybody, because it's all right us talking about how we support everyone else, but as I inferred to before, we've also got to look after ourselves. So what are you personally doing to look after and support your own mental well-being?
That's a wonderful question, Richard, because you're absolutely, I'm very aware of self-care, and I'm also aware if we don't look after ourselves, we can't look after others as well. So I try and exercise, but I also try and split my work life and my personal life. In between that is homeschooling. I also practice mindfulness, and I do a lot of reflection, but I also do a gratitude diary as well. And that really helps me. But I think I'm also aware of my personal feelings. So maybe back to you, Richard, are you able to give us some tips on how we can manage, we all on this call today or who's listening can manage our personal feelings?
Yeah. I think one of the big issues for all of us at the moment is the whole uncertainty piece. And when we're not certain about things, or we feel out of control about what's going to happen, that's where we start getting worried, concerned, having anxieties. Yeah. And when we study more people that are considered more resilient, and believe it or not, we do that. Yeah. Sort of, because we do have some people seem to be naturally more resilient for dealing with these things than others, and the rest of us, me included, have to consciously learn coping skills and practice what they do, and actually do what you're doing, which is having to consciously think about what do I need to do to support myself, rather than just let life sort of wave over you. So when we look at these more resilient people, especially in the context of things that they perceive that they can't control, you know, the normal thing for most of us is then just to get worked up and worried about that, I can't do anything about it. Where those people that are more resilient tend to take a different tack, in that rather than in their minds wasting that negative energy, is actually using that energy more positively, in terms of consciously, a bit like you were referring to, consciously thinking about, okay, if I can't control it, what could I do differently that might influence the outcome a little bit more? Or they might actually be planning ahead and say, look, there's no way I'm going to be able to control that. The consequences of that event are going to be A, B, C. But what can I do to control the impact or influence the impact of A, B, C? So it's that sort of conscious thought process of taking time to step back and actually think, right, what can I do? There's an interesting paradigm where they say for any situation, there are 3 players. There's yourself, there's other people, and there's circumstances. And when things go wrong or things are out of control, we always tend to blame other people or circumstances. Whereas the only thing we can actually control is us, and how we're going to react and adapt to those circumstances. So it's a similar sort of mindset, if you like, in terms of how you approach those things. A lot easier said than done, because they are sort of coping strategies that you need to learn. And you need to consciously take time to do that and put them in place. And we all know how easy it is to slip out. Once you start doing them, you then slip out of them again. So it's having that discipline as well. But again, that's where, as employers, we can support our people by just providing them with information and education about what they can do to support themselves. Because, you know, when we're looking at well-being in the workplace, don't consider the employer as the NHS, where they give everything. You know, the individual employee also has to take responsibility for their own health and well-being. Your role as an employer is to support them in doing that. I think that's the nuance that we're very much about. And then there's lots of specific things we can do. So you mentioned about getting your work-life balance right and those types of things. I'm very much for that. So I'm very, very clear about my routine during the day. How do I switch off? I always finish at 6 o'clock in the evening regardless, and then actually go and get changed into another set of clothes. I don't wear work clothes in this situation, but it just psychologically, it puts me in a different place. Yeah, I always switch the phone off. I switch the laptop off. So I know psychologically, there's a clear distinction. And the other thing I do is I try and ration my social media intake.
That's very important.
Because I won't use the Trumpism of fake news, but you know what I mean. There's so much stuff out there that actually just creates uncertainty and anxiety. So if you do see something, actually, the sense, and you're not sure about it, there are 2 really good websites to go and get the facts. Yeah, and if you've got the facts, at least you know whether you should be worrying about it or not. Yeah, one is .gov.uk, where it's all the government advice. You'll have the similar in Scotland. And the other is which is super support system, is the NHS website, Live Well.
Yes.
So with lots of supporting information on different things. And again, if you're looking at it for your own benefit and you see something that's really valuable for you, why not just post that link out to your team members? And actually, from a leadership point of view, say, look, I found this really useful. You might be interested in it. No more, no less. But you're feeding stuff out to people and supporting them.
Great, thanks. Absolutely. And when you were talking about finishing at 6 and putting that laptop down, and you know, it's walking out that room as well, Richard, and taking yourself away from and obviously some people may not have an office so they can do that. So it's actually moving away from the area they have been in during the day, you know, changing their clothes and embracing the evening, whether that's family time.
That's a really good practical point. I'm lucky enough, I have a space in the house that is my office, because I do I've always done a lot of work from home, and I'm fortunate that way. What we generally say to people that are having to use the kitchen table or a corner of the dining room, that type of thing, is actually dedicate 10 minutes at the end of the working day just to closing everything down, clearing everything away, and putting it out of sight. And then 10 minutes at the beginning of the day to set yourself back up again. So when you're then switched off and trying to relax in the evening, you're not just glancing over and seeing your workspace sitting there saying, come to me, come to me. Yeah.
Or tempted.
Yeah.
No, but that's a really good point. So Richard, we've been talking about well-being and health, obviously since the pandemic over the last couple of months, but are you able to share how the pandemic has affected employee morale, in your opinion?
Yeah, I don't think it would come to anybody's surprise that in general morale is down. Humans, again, we're wired to be social animals, so we don't do isolation very well. We don't do movement restrictions very well, as you probably see when the sun's out at the weekends. So undoubtedly it's affecting us all. But again, looking at the Divided Together report that we produced this week, there's some really interesting stuff in there, and Louise will sort of post a link for everybody to look at it in terms of how people are reacting. And it's mixed, you know. There's some people are actually, this is working really well for them. You know, it's working really well for me. I'm a lot more productive and effective. I'm spending a lot more time with my family than I was before. And you also look at the sort of reaction of different groups. So when you look at people that are still in work versus those on furlough, there's roughly the same proportion of each group that wish they were in the other group. So there's the whole series of sort of mixed up things going on out there. So have a look through that report, because there's some enlightening points that will sort of make you think, is this happening in my workplace? However, on the positive side as well, there's what I'm seeing in organisations is almost like a community spirit evolving. There's a huge number of organisations are getting really inventive about social initiatives that they can put on for their employees via Zoom or whatever method to try and maintain that social cohesion, because we know that one of the most important aspects of work in a person's life is how it supports their social well-being. And no matter how satisfied I am working from home, you know what? I still do miss not seeing people and talking to people when I'm in the workplace. So those are the sorts of things that are going on from a morale point of view.
Okay. You touched on earlier about the challenge in adapting with different, adapting is going to be different from person to person. So are you able to share how to support team members, Richard, who may not want to get involved in some activities? So we've seen some activities like Keep Fit at 9:30 in the morning, or some quizzes throughout the day, you know, just our tea breaks. So can you maybe share with us, you know, how do we get those involved who may not want to be involved, and how can we engage them better?
Right, okay. I would say something now which might not go down too well at times, is just because you think you've created this fantastic social activity, don't then assume that everybody will also think it's a fantastic thing.
Absolutely.
Because people haven't joined in, don't assume it's because your engagement is off. You know, people may just not want to take part in that activity. And I think what we do need to do is just, again, it comes back to that compassion, that sensitivity, is just recognize, you know, if people don't want to do it, just leave them be. You know, keep sending the invites out. So keep the door open, but don't expect everybody to come through the door. We have a similar thing at Westfield on a Thursday evening with a pub quiz at 4 o'clock. And I've been invited every week. I've never attended. And quite frankly, it's the last thing I want to do towards the end of the week, is spending social time with all the people I've been arguing with all week. That's an exaggeration, but you get that. I'd rather have that hour actually just spending a little bit more time with my family. So I still get the invites. I still politely decline each week. There's no problem. Just respect people's wishes, I think, is the thing.
Yeah, no, that's really, really good advice there. So we're going to change the focus slightly, Richard, with regards to some of the attendees on the call today are individual team members, and this is a pre-question. So first of all, if people are healthier and adhere to all the guidelines that's been stipulated, will this help them prevent picking up the virus? So a more sort of a personal question with regards to their health.
Well, first of all, I'm not a clinician, I'm an educationalist. Let me put that thing in. And actually the question that you phrased is in two parts. So
yeah.
if you follow all the guidelines, then that should reduce your risk of picking up the virus. Okay. If you're healthy and fit, viruses being viruses, that won't necessarily reduce your chances of picking up the virus, because if a virus gets you, it gets you. Mm-hmm. Being healthier and fitter will allow you to potentially recover quicker if you do get the virus. And because your immune system is stronger, the impact of the virus when you do get it is likely to be less. That's the way to look at it. Yeah. So actually, we've all, we could all, I'm sure, recognize that we could be a little bit fitter and healthier. And that's been the case probably for all of us for the last 5 or 10 years. If there was ever a time when you should seriously consider just getting a little bit healthier, a little bit fitter, I'm not saying be Superman, now's the time to do it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. And if we move away from sort of individual to leadership teams and an HR team perspective, how can we support each other, Richard?
Well, I think this really is a common question, particularly for HR teams and for small business owners where you are the sole leader. And it's quite often they're lonely places to be, aren't they? Yeah. And the question is, who cares for the carers? So we spend all our time looking after everyone else. Who looks after us? And the answer is usually there isn't anybody above us to look after us. So obviously it goes back to that obligation of looking after yourself. But what we've found a lot of people are doing is they're reaching out to people that they know that are in similar positions, perhaps in different industry sectors, but similar sort of roles and positions where they can empathize and support each other, and almost buddying up. And actually what's happened on these types of forums that we've been doing is people have been then going into chat and saying, this is me, I'm a such and such person. If anybody wants to reach out to me, feel free. And quite often that's also a disguise for saying, could somebody talk to me, please? Yeah. And so by all means, use your networks, use this network today to sort of just to reach out. And because sometimes it's just, all you need to do is just talk to somebody about how you feel. And that's enough just to lift the weight off you and give you that reassurance. So that, again, it comes down to self-responsibility. We've got to take responsibility, haven't we? If we've got nobody that we can turn to, we've got to find people that we can turn to.
Absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. So earlier I touched on, when you asked me the question, I touched on homeschooling, and which I've been doing for the last, and enjoying as well actually, the last 3 months. So could you have any tips or hints for any of the attendees on the call today about how we adapt to work with children at home, or perhaps pets at home as well?
I think, again, this came out of the Divided Together report about how parents see each other as well as how others see parents and all this type of thing. Personally, this isn't an issue for me because mine have grown up and left home. So, but this is probably one of the biggest issues out there with people having to work from home, schools not being open, and having to provide childcare and work as well. So we need to come back to leadership again. We need to recognize that these are real difficult issues for people, and we might need to look at, we do need to look at how we can allow them, give them psychological permission to work differently, work more creatively, in order to find solutions. Because every parenting, as you're aware, every parenting situation is different, isn't it? In terms of the demands there, as well as the capability. We had one really good example, actually, a couple of weeks ago on a chamber forum where somebody popped up and put the hand up. And they're a sort of youngish couple, late 20s with a 5 and 6-year-old. Both worked for different employers, both were having to work from home. So you can imagine the chaos there. And they just got their heads together and said, well, look, this is nuts. What would really work for us is what if we rotated 2 hours on, 2 hours off? So one of us looked after the kids, one of us worked, and then we swapped over. And then they said, well, actually, we might need to do 6 days to make up the hours that we're supposed to be working. So we'll have family day on Sunday. So they both decided to go back to their respective employers. Both employers were enlightened enough, shall we say, to listen and say, well, what's the other employer saying? And so both employers agreed, and they set up this system. But both employers also said, and don't worry about working the 5th day or the 6th day. Don't do that. And it worked really well for them. But it also worked really well because the leadership in both organisations then recognised that the teams that they worked in had to be completely aware of the situation and appreciate that there were certain times that they could contact them and get an immediate response and certain times where they couldn't. So it's just sort of thinking out of the box, but there might be different solutions for different people. And the issue there sometimes crops up is about fairness, isn't it? You know, well, how can they do that and we have to do this? And I think we're in such a unique situation. I think as leaders, we're justified in saying, well, look, this isn't about what's fair, what's not fair. It's about helping everybody in different ways to get through this as best they can. And I think if you explain it that way, most employees would go, yeah, fair enough. I understand. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as you say, you're talking about fairness, Richard, but it's back to what you were talking about earlier and all through this call, communication. You know, ask you know, if you don't ask, you don't know what the response is going to be. And as you say, you know, you might actually put an idea into their head that they can maybe perhaps share with other co-colleagues as well.
And that
as best practices.
You're absolutely right that, you know, we as individuals on this call should, if we've got situations, we should feel comfortable enough to go and ask our line manager, this is my situation, this is the way I think it could be done best. Likewise, why don't we as employers actually, in a controlled way, be asking specific individuals or groups of individuals, you know, what ideas do you have that would make this work better for you? And in doing so, you'd be more productive, so we as the employer would benefit as well. I think that open questioning both ways would work really well. It takes a bit of trust, though.
Yes. And I think you're absolutely right. And I think we should maybe do more of about when we're having the catch up with our employees, asking them and how are they, not how they're coping with the situation, but how are they within themselves. And that might lead to asking for this 2 on 2 off or another sort of form of working pattern as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. So if we sort of continue the theme, Richard, on health and well-being, in your opinion, we talked earlier about separating our work life with our personal life. Why are taking breaks, working from home, so important?
Well, in working from home, specifically, generally as well, but in terms of working home, as I inferred at the beginning, we tend to, when we're working from home, we tend to overwork because we're outside of the structure and routine that the workplace tends to give us. We have less, for most of us, especially those without children, we have less disruption than when we're at work. So if we don't have a regular routine, we tend to then overwork, and that can lead to sort of issues to do with burnout, tiredness, fatigue, that type of thing, which I'm sure all of us are very familiar with from time to time. And when we look at going back to how humans are designed to work, we're actually programmed not to work 100% flat out all the time. That just leads to burnout, because we're designed to work in what we call an oscillating rhythm. So that's peaks of high intensity effort followed by rest and recovery. And you can look at that on an hourly basis, a daily basis, a weekly basis, a monthly basis. So it's about how we pace ourselves, and that's where breaks come in. Breaks are really, really important, just to give you that small bit of time to rest and recover and go again. Now, that might be putting your feet up on the desk and having a cup of tea. It might actually be scheduling that once you've done this quite intense project, you're now going to do an activity that's less intense. So you're actually oscillating the intensity of what you're doing. And interestingly enough, if you look at sort of employment law and health and safety, one of the first aspects of an employment contract was your right to have breaks during the day and breaks during the year, which we call holiday. And they were built in to allow us to continue to keep recovering as we're going along, because it recognises you can't just work full tilt all the time. So we shouldn't feel guilty about taking breaks. We need to build a routine when we're working at home where we actually have set breaks during the day, like we would do at work. And if you've got a garden and the sun's out, don't feel guilty about going for a 10-minute, 15-minute break outside with a cup of tea or a coffee in the garden. Embrace the opportunity, because you don't get that at work or in the workplace. So they're really, really important breaks we tend to find that people are most efficient and most productive when they pace themselves properly. So that's where you're peaking at the right time. A good example of that is they say that the optimum concentration span for the human brain is 50 minutes, and then it starts to wane. So with that in mind, what do you do to structure your workload? So if you've got a 3-hour project, break it down into smaller chunks with a couple of 2 or 5 minute breaks, just to and you'll find you actually complete the work a lot quicker, and more importantly, more accurately, so you're not wasting time doing sorting all the typos out. Yeah.
And I think a follow on from that, Richard, is, so for example, I'm a morning person, so I like to get up 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock at night, not so much an evening person. So I would rather start early and I'm most productive in the first hours of the day. Is that something for people to kind of recognise as well, what their kind of learning style and their working pattern, or the optimum working pattern is?
Absolutely, and we've probably got a better chance of doing that now while we're working from home than we do in the office, because we're less constrained in some respects about when we work. So you're a lark, what they call a lark. You work optimally in the early hours of the day, if we're taking the full day. Some of us will be owls, they're referred to, where we actually work better in the afternoon and evening. So I know that can affect communication processes. There's certain time, it's almost like your own flexi time, isn't it? There's certain time where you've got to be there. But then if you know that you work more effectively, more productively at certain times of the day, then doesn't it make sense to then work at those times of the day? It's just being smart about it, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And earlier you touched on rest and recovery, and something that we're maybe, since being locked down, maybe sleep is something that we've really not been thinking about it. So can you share again in your experience, why is sleep important, and what can we do to sleep better, especially preparing for the kind of restart as we sort of move out of lockdown in the coming weeks?
Yeah, well, I don't think it's dependent on restart. It's something that we're all particularly bad at. And actually, of all the various topics we do in terms of coaching, workshops and webinars, sleep is the most popular one, because everybody knows what it's like not to sleep well. And actually, if you look at some of the stats in terms of the proportion of people that have problems with sleep, it's just frightening. And really what we should be focusing on is not necessarily how many hours you sleep a night, although there are the recommendations, everybody will know about that, but it's about the quality of the sleep you get, because it's the quality of your sleep that actually enhances the I can never say this, by the way, restorative and recuperative aspect of why we sleep. So we have to sleep in every period of 24 hours so the body can recuperate and recover, ready to go again. So in terms of improving the quality of your sleep, there's some golden rules. So the first one is to have a regular sleeping pattern. And by that, I mean, you go to bed and you get up at roughly the same time every day. So when I say roughly, that's sort of within 30 minutes. And that's because the body likes, again, predictability and consistency. I mentioned it before. And if it knows that it's having this regular sleep pattern, it automatically assumes that it is recovering a lot better than it used to do. Yeah, sort of almost like a mind trick. Linked to that regular sleeping pattern is a big mistake people have that significantly impacts on the quality of their sleep is they don't prepare for sleep. You don't wind down. So it's really, really important that you have a period of time, either before bed or in bed, where you're gradually winding down and getting yourself ready to sleep. A little bit like if we were all going to go out for a run now. That's perked a few people up. And I was leading. We're going to go for a 6-mile run. Yeah? You would expect me to warm you up, yeah, first, and then gradually increase the intensity, and then we'd go. Sleep's the reverse. Okay, so what works really well for me is in bed, 20 minutes, dim light, reading a book. And all that's doing, by concentrating on reading the book, it's distracting all the thoughts I'm having about the day. So I'm not thinking about that, and it's allowing me to switch off and calm down so that I can gradually slip off. The other thing is a restful, what we call a restful sleep environment. So the conditions in your bedroom significantly affect the quality of your sleep. So the optimum conditions for sleep, generally speaking, should be cool. So that's like 18 degrees or less. Okay. Dark, noise-free. But everybody will have their own things about what helps them to sleep the best. So some of us can't get sleep without the light on, and it goes back to our early years. You know, some like some background music, those types of things. So that's that. And then the other two big ones I'd say is avoid this. Not be looking at this, your laptop, your iPad, within 30 minutes before bed, because all that's doing is stimulating you, getting you wound up as you're reading things, getting you interested again, making you more alert. And if you've not got a blue light filter on this, it will also disrupt the production of a hormone called melatonin, which naturally is produced when the light starts to fade to induce you to sleep. And the other one is alcohol. You know, we're all probably drinking a little bit more than we used to in lockdown. That's quite common, and that's okay. But if we drink a bit too much, it will disrupt the quality of our sleep. So too much alcohol might be great for getting you straight off to sleep as soon as your head touches the pillow. But what will happen is it will disrupt your sleep patterns during the night, and you'll actually end up waking up quite a lot of times, but you might not even recognize you're waking up. And that's disrupting, obviously, the quality of your sleep. So you wake up feeling, I've slept all night, but I feel dreadful. But you haven't. You've been waking up. You just haven't really been conscious of it. So those are things you can do.
Great tips. And it's my final question. My final question is, in order to prepare, you talked about going in that 6-mile run. In order to prepare for that, what can we all do on the call to be healthier as we go into the next coming weeks?
Okay, and this comes back to where we started off, actually, where it's about that fourth tip, which was look after ourselves so we can be more resilient, so we can better support our people. So it's about our physical resilience, actually, and what I mean by that is our energy levels. So our energy levels will dictate not only what we can do, but how well we do it. And they also dictate how well we feel about ourselves. So if you've got loads of va-va-voom, as they used to say in the old car advert, you feel better about yourself, you feel more energized, you're able to do more, you're able to be more positive. And that's really, really good for your mental health. And there's just 4 things actually for your energy. It's really simple. You need to look at the fuel you're putting inside you. So simple terms, just a nice, healthy, balanced diet. That's all your body needs for the appropriate fuel. Keep well hydrated. That's really important for your energy levels as well. The more you can get active, and that might be just going for a brisk walk, it may be getting up during the day, doing just a quick stretch and those types of things, then the fitter this machine of yours is, which is your body. a bit like a car, the more efficient it is at using the fuel that you put inside you. So that's exercise, second part. Sleep's the third bit. And we just talked about, you know, good quality sleep is absolutely important. It's how you top your battery up. Yeah. And then the final bit is, and it comes back to this rest and recovery piece again, is how you pace yourself through the day. So again, you wouldn't dream, well, you might, but you wouldn't dream of taking your car out and hammering the pedal to the metal and seeing the fuel consumption gauge go, whoa. And it's the same with us. If we're working flat out without pacing ourselves during the day, that energy just runs out quicker than it would do.